Hi, and welcome to Creepy Crime Story, where the darkest truths aren't imagined, they're real. Florence, Arizona, a low desert street off Felix and Judd. One porch light burns past midnight like a marker on a map. Neighbors say the dogs inside had been restless. That's all they heard. No shouting, no glass, just a house that stopped answering. When deputies step in, they find a kitchen that tells its own story. A woman on the tile, unresponsive, counters neat. No obvious sign of forced entry. One address, one scene, no second location to muddy the record. Her name is Christina Tina Lopez, 43, mother of three. In cases like this, we don't start with speculation. We start with anchors. Date, April 11th, 2024. Jurisdiction, Pinal County. Initial posture, welfare check turned death investigation. From the doorway inward, procedure takes over. Secure the room, photograph surfaces, log who enters and when, isolate the dogs, notify detectives. What you don't do is explain motive at the door, you earn it with evidence. The kitchen is ordinary, that matters. Scene integrity depends on ordinary things. What's out of place, what isn't. Officers log the time. They note lighting, footwear impressions, if any, trace on high contact points, the condition of doors and windows. There's no pried latch, no shattered frame. In domestic homicides, the absence of forced entry isn't a flourish, it's a lead. Access is a form of evidence. Christina's life is recorded the way investigators record a victim, where she lived, who depended on her, what responsibilities structured her day. She had been estranged from her husband. There had been tension about parenting schedules. Those are context lines, not conclusions. The task now is to convert context into a timeline that can survive court. Who arrived, who left, who had uncomplicated reason to be here on a Thursday night. The first hours are methodical. Detectives build the clock around dispatch records and arrival logs. They bracket the likely window of injury. They preserve devices, canvas for neighborhood cameras, and document anything that could speak to timing. Lights on a smart switch, a vehicle seen idling, a text that stopped mid-evening. The tone is clinical by design. You don't chase the loudest theory, you test the quietest facts. In towns like this, murders aren't just crimes. They tear at the fabric of a quiet community. That line gets used because it's true, but inside the tape, the only thing that matters is proof. No forced entry points the lens toward someone with permission, routine, or expectation. A welfare check becomes a homicide scene not because it feels that way, because the evidence won't let it be anything else. Sometimes case files look too clean in the opening hour. The data align too cleanly. Sometimes that was the problem. So the team slows down. They lock the address, freeze the variables, and begin the single track this story will follow. One house, one night, one victim whose timeline will lead to a plea and a sentence measured in the rest of a life. We don't build cases on guesses, we build them on who the victim was the day before everything stopped. Christina Tina Lopez, 43, lived in Florence, Arizona. She worked, parented 3 kids, kept a schedule people could corroborate. Investigators start there because routine is measurable. Employers confirm hours, schools and caregivers confirm pickups and drop-offs. Banking activity, messages and calls outline a normal Thursday that ends too early. Nothing in those records shows a plan to leave the house that night and not return. That's the point. The victim wasn't moving. The event came to her. Estrangement matters only as context that affects access. Detectives document the status through public records and recent communications about the children. They don't put weight on emotion, they put weight on logistics. Who had reason to be at the address, who had a pattern of arriving without notice, and who still had keys or knew the door routine. In domestic cases, access is often the first variable you can actually test. The team maps Christina's last week with a narrow lens. Coworkers describe her as present and reliable. There's no report of a sudden health issue. Friends mention stress around parenting exchanges, but nothing that suggests she intended to relocate or avoid contact. That difference, stress versus flight, matters. Stress can be documented as tone in texts and cadence in calls. Flight leaves footprints like packed bags, large withdrawals, or changed routes. None of that appears. Procedurally, the victim review feeds a clock. When did Christina last answer a message? When did she last open a door for a delivery? Was a porch camera or smart device registering motion at a consistent hour? Even if home tech is limited, neighbors can give practical timestamps. A garage light that usually goes off by 10, a dog that barks at vehicles, a trash bin rolled in on schedule. Each small confirmation compresses the window when something could have happened. Medical history is collected but stays in the background unless it explains a finding at the scene. Here, nothing credible points to a spontaneous medical collapse. The posture of the room and the condition of the victim drive the case toward criminal causation. That shift isn't emotional, it's mechanical. If the day is ordinary and the house is ordinary, then focus returns to access and proximity. Detectives apply the same discipline to Christina's devices. They secure the phone and account access with a warrant, preserve cloud contents, and request carrier logs. The goal isn't to pry, the goal is to timestamp reality. A read receipt at 8:12 p.m., a grocery receipt at 6:41 p.m., an app check-in at 9:03. Those pins make later statements testable. If someone claims they spoke to her after 10, the data will agree, or it won't. Clean timelines survive court, messy ones collapse on contact. The human side is handled with restraint. Family interviews are scheduled with victim advocates present. Questions stay tight. Last contact, planned visits. Who held the kids that evening? Whether Christina expected anyone at the door. In towns like this, neighbors want to help, and rumors move faster than affidavits. The case team keeps the perimeter narrow so they don't end up chasing stories that never touch the front step. One detail becomes a hinge without becoming a headline. The household had recent tension around parenting logistics. That can create legitimate reasons for drop-ins or exchanges, and it changes how you read no forced entry. If you're expected at a residence, a closed door doesn't prove safety. It proves opportunity. The file notes that and moves on. No character studies, no speeches. By the end of this phase, the victim profile does what it's supposed to do: remove noise. Christina was anchored in place, tied to her children and her routine, and not signaling any plan to vanish. She was in her kitchen on April 11, 2024, doing what people do at the end of a day. The story that follows will be sourced from timestamps, not theories. Investigation notes leave room for a single line of doubt, the kind that keeps good teams from rushing, the data aligned too cleanly. Sometimes that was the problem. When routine looks perfect, you check whether someone else curated it. You verify app pings against network logs, confirm work hours with badge data if they exist, and cross-check neighbor recollections with dispatch audio. That's not drama. That's how you keep a case from breaking later. There's a reason victimology sits early in the series. It sets the boundary. One person, one address, one night. Our job is to show what changed inside those boundaries and to prove who made it change. A clean case timeline isn't dramatic, it's necessary. The team starts at the beginning of Christina Lopez's final day and builds forward using only what can be confirmed. Morning is fixed by routine, work obligations noted by supervisors, school-related messages for the kids, a couple of short calls that match her typical pattern. Nothing indicates a change in health, travel, or plans. By late afternoon, she is accounted for at home in Florence, Arizona. From there, the clock tightens toward the welfare check just before 10 p.m. on April 11, 2024. Investigators lock the outer boundaries first. Dispatch audio and KD entries provide the end marker: time of call, units assigned, arrival sequence, scene secured. The start marker is drawn from earlier ordinary data points: employer confirmation that she completed the day as scheduled, a routine message about dinner, a brief exchange with a friend that ends without alarm. You don't infer intent from these items, you use them to eliminate gaps. If the day looks typical into the evening, the anomaly is not before she gets home, it's after. With the frame set, detectives work the middle. They canvass the immediate block around Felix and Judd for doorbell cameras and motion-triggered lights. Some homes in this part of Florence have basic devices, others don't. Even without continuous video, motion logs can corroborate broad activity windows. A car passing, a light flare, a shadow crossing a driveway. That isn't proof by itself, but when timestamps from different households align, the window narrows to a useful span. The goal is not to create a movie. The goal is to chart movement that can be matched against statements. Phone and account preservation follows standard procedure. A warrant covers device contents and cloud backups. Carriers supply call detail records and text metadata: who contacted whom, when, and for how long. App providers are contacted for server-side logs where applicable. Investigators are careful with interpretation. A delivered message isn't the same as a read message. A read message isn't the same as a reply. Where the phone was physically located is a question for later tools, but even without location, the cadence tells you when normal life stopped answering. Inside the home, the team tracks indicators that help anchor time without overreading them. Lights that were on when units arrived, a TV left on a menu screen, a meal prep stage consistent with someone finishing the day. These are not conclusions. They are pins. If neighbors report hearing dogs become more active around a consistent hour most nights, and that pattern changed, it becomes one more data point, not a headline, not a theory, a data point. By early evening, Christina's communications taper into the ordinary quiet of a weeknight. No message suggests she planned company. That matters for access analysis. In domestic homicide investigations, the absence of forced entry shifts attention from how did a stranger get in to who didn't need permission. The team notes this but resists the urge to jump ahead. The data align too cleanly. Sometimes that was the problem. You test clean timelines twice, compare device timestamps with provider logs, verify that a clock on a doorbell camera wasn't off by a few minutes, audit dispatch times against GPS pings from responding units. Witness outreach is kept focused to avoid contamination. Neighbors are asked for the least interpretive facts. When they saw lights, whether a vehicle was idling, whether anyone knocked on their door seeking help. Family and friends are asked about expected visits or exchanges that evening. The aim is to reconstruct a corridor of time that admits the minimum number of explanations. When 2 or 3 sources converge on the same 10 or 15-minute range, that becomes the working window for the fatal event. Nothing in the last 24 hours shows Christina preparing to leave her life. No bags, no sudden withdrawals, no "I need to get out" texts. That difference, routine preserved, plans unaltered, closes off entire branches of speculation. It also shapes the next step, early forensic review to confirm cause and approximate timing, then align that with access. The timeline doesn't accuse anyone, it simply leaves less space to hide. One more choice keeps the narrative disciplined. The investigation treats every clock source as fallible until cross-checked. A phone's system time can drift. A camera's clock can be wrong. A neighbor's recollection can compress minutes. So the team consolidates only after each piece is verified against an independent marker, provider logs, dispatch GPS, or a second device on the same network. Clean timelines survive court because they were built to survive error. This is where a human note belongs and nowhere else. A day built on work, kids, and home should be forgettable. That's what safety looks like. When a case like this breaks that pattern, the fix is not big speeches. It's precision. In towns like this, murders aren't just crimes. They force everyone to learn how to read the quiet parts of a day. The clock is set. Now the work is to translate a quiet kitchen into facts that hold up in court. The scene team documents from the threshold inward, overall photos, mid-range, then close. Every item gets a number. Footwear covers and gloves on. One path of entry and exit to protect trace. Doors and windows are examined and photographed in place before anyone touches a latch. Nothing about this is theatrical. It's repetition, because repetition keeps small mistakes from rewriting a case later. Paramedics confirm there's no sign of life and step back. Detectives mark the position of the body, the orientation, the distances to fixed points like cabinets and appliances. Anything that could shift a narrative, drag marks, displacement on counters, signs of a struggle, is assessed without assumption. Swabs are taken from obvious contact points. If there is blood visible, it's documented in pattern and volume, not dramatized. This is how you avoid arguments months later about what was there and what was added by sloppy handling. The medical examiner's investigator arrives and conducts the initial assessment on scene. The preliminary indicators are clear enough that the conversation moves quickly from sudden death in residence to homicide by sharp force trauma. There's no credible medical explanation that could account for the injuries without outside action. Time of injury is always approximate at this stage, but the indicators, body temperature relative to ambient early post-mortem changes, and last known communications, align with the late evening window already defined by dispatch records. A case only gets steadier when medical signs agree with the timeline built from phones and doorways. One number becomes a reference point for the rest of the investigation. Early, a working figure circulates in initial paperwork. It will be corrected as the autopsy formalizes counts. That's normal. The only number that belongs in a finished script is the one prosecution ultimately locks, 43 stab wounds. Acknowledging the early lower figure once in the record is fair. Repeating it would invite confusion. From here on, the count is singular and final. The team avoids making the scene say more than it can. If a knife is recovered, it is logged. If it isn't, the absence is noted without turning into a theory about disposal. If there are signs of cleanup, that observation will be supported by chemistry in the lab, not by a hunch on tape. Chain of custody is the heartbeat. One label, one signature, one line on a form from kitchen to evidence room to laboratory. Defense attorneys can challenge methods. They struggle to challenge math when the math is tight. Inside the residence, digital traces matter as much as physical ones. Investigators secure any home devices with consent or warrant, a router that can timestamp last connections, a smart speaker that may hold recent voice logs, a thermostat that records adjustments. None of these prove a motive. They prove moments. A thermostat bump at 9:18 p.m. means someone interacted with the house. If that time conflicts with a claim made later, the discrepancy becomes a lead. The entry points are recorded again under raking light. No pry, no splintering, no defeated deadbolt. That detail isn't fresh, it was noted on arrival, but here it's linked to the early medical conclusion. If injuries are extensive and there's no forced entry, the universe of possible explanations narrows to people with permission, people with expectation, or people using a routine to mask entry. That is not an accusation. It's what the scene allows you to test next. The autopsy is scheduled fast. The medical examiner will document wound tracks, depths, and angles and will estimate how long the assault likely lasted. For our purposes, what matters now is the minimum. Cause of death is homicide by sharp force injury. There is no alternate medical cause. The timing is consistent with the evening window. Those three anchors support the next operational choices: whom to interview first, what to seize, and which statements to test against data. There's a human reality to this phase that shouldn't be ignored. Someone's kitchen became an evidence room. That is hard to watch even in formal reports. The respectful approach isn't to turn away, it's to keep the language neutral and the process exact. Families don't get closure from adjectives. They get it when a scene is so cleanly handled that a resolution can stand up on appeal. With the preliminary medical findings, detectives return to access. If there was no forced entry and the injuries required proximity, who had a reason to be here without a knock? In domestic cases, schedules often create a pattern that explains presence, drop-offs, pickups, helping with a task. That's why Chapter 2 exists, not to tell a biography, but to identify justifiable reasons a door would open. Now the question tightens. Was any visit expected? Was anyone scheduled to return an item? If the answers are no, the lack of forced entry means access was either routine or deceptive. Testing that premise moves the case forward without speculation. Investigators pull visitor patterns from neighbors, look for repeated vehicle sightings, and check whether any camera, porch, garage, or a neighbor's driveway logged a make or shape they can match to statements. Meanwhile, the autopsy will refine the injury count and narrow the assault duration, which helps estimate how long a perpetrator would need to be inside. You can't be in two places at once. That's where logs and GPS do the heavy lifting. This is the pivot. We now have a single scene confirmed as a homicide, a time window held up by both communications and medical signs, and a final injury count to be used consistently going forward. The next move isn't to name a suspect in the narrative. It's to line up statements, opportunities, and data until one account can't carry its own weight. The scene is logged and the time window is tight. The next job is to test people against that window, what they saw, what they did, and what their devices say they did. Detectives start with the inner circle. Family members who shared responsibilities with Christina Tina Lopez, neighbors on the block, and anyone who had a routine reason to stop at the Florence home on April 11, 2024. The script for these contacts is deliberate. Questions are short, timestamps are specific, and every answer must be something that can be checked against a record. Neighbors provide the first concrete leads. Two homes near Felix and Judd have motion-activated cameras. One shows a vehicle silhouette slowing near the address after dark. Another registers a brief flare of headlights facing the residence and then darkness again. The cameras aren't cinematic, but the logs are dependable. The clips and motion timestamps are pulled, their internal clocks compared to the time shown on dispatch records to correct drift. A 5 to 10-minute span emerges in which a car was present outside the house, consistent with the working window established earlier. Inside the home, detectives collect Christina's phone and obtain provider records through a warrant. A short series of messages from early evening ends naturally. There is no late text asking for help, no outgoing call that suggests panic, and critically, no sign she planned to meet anyone at the door. Cloud backups and app server logs confirm the cadence. Activity trails off as a normal night would. That calm is evidence. It tells you the interruption was sudden and close. Interviews with family are handled with advocates present. The focus is factual, plans for the children that week, any scheduled exchanges, and whether Christina expected visitors. The answer that matters most is about routine. Who might arrive unannounced without raising concern? Detectives are careful not to assign motive in an interview room. They build a list of names, vehicles, and time ranges they can verify elsewhere. One detail from this phase will not be repeated later out of respect, but it belongs in the record once because it is part of the truth. A child waited in a vehicle outside around the time of the attack and later asked a painful question about whether the mother had been hurt. Investigators document the existence of that moment and move on. It shapes nothing about the process except urgency and clarity. If someone was outside, the timeline for entry and exit must be sharp enough to withstand court. Device-to-network audits are the backbone here. Carrier call detail records are lined up against the motion camera triggers, CAD timestamps, and the limited smart home signals available. Even without full GPS from every device, the pattern is useful. If a phone claims to be in one city while a car associated with that user appears on a neighbor's camera near Florence, something will fail to match. Investigators request traffic camera checks on the nearest feeder roads, aiming to catch the same vehicle shape a few minutes before or after the block appearances. It is not unusual for one blurry frame to become the hinge of a case when it lines up with a statement to the minute. Statements collected during this phase are written verbatim and signed. Detectives ask the same question different ways to test reliability. When did you last speak to Christina? Did she expect you? What was your route that evening? If someone volunteers a time, that time gets tested against a device. If someone can't remember, they are not pushed into a guess. Guesses are how cases break later. The team is looking for conflicts that can't be explained by a clock running fast or a memory compressing a few minutes. Meanwhile, evidence techs return to the entry points to look again under controlled light. The goal isn't to rediscover what's already known. It's to tie what neighbors saw to what the house shows. If a door's wear pattern suggests regular use by family and friends, that helps explain why there are no forced marks. If a lock requires a particular technique to open without a key, that suggests familiarity. Either way, access remains the central filter through which statements will pass. Detectives also check for recent service calls and deliveries to the address. Plumbers, maintenance, repair. A legitimate visit can look suspicious in the wrong frame. Clearing those names early prevents false leads from chewing up time. On April 11th, there is no confirmed service record that would justify a late drop-by. That absence matters. When you remove benign reasons for a vehicle to sit outside, you focus naturally on personal access and domestic routine. What emerges by the end of this round is a working map, a vehicle present near the house within the critical window, a household routine that did not include expected visitors, and a victim who did not broadcast distress. The combination narrows the list of people who could have entered without force and remained long enough to commit a prolonged, close-range assault. It still isn't the moment to name anyone in the story. It is the moment to accept that the next steps, pulling additional traffic camera frames, cross-checking fuel receipts, and testing a few phones for movement, will either confirm or break alibis that sounded confident at first tell. There's a reason this phase feels quiet on camera and loud in court. It's where claims meet clocks. If a person says they never went near the address but a neighbor's device logs the same car shape at the curb, the conversation changes. If a phone was powered down during the exact window and then reactivated miles away, the conversation changes again. None of this is dramatic in the moment. It becomes dramatic when a plea is on the table because the math won't move. A human note belongs here too, handled in one line. In a small community, cooperation is a measure of care. People opened their doors, turned over their clips, and gave straight answers so a family could get something like closure. That cooperation is not just kindness, It's proof that a case belongs to more than a file folder. By the end of the first push, scene locked, window tight, devices preserved, detectives had a short list built on access and timing. The next step wasn't a hunch, it was reconciliation. Statements made in calm voices were measured against motion triggers, carrier records, and the minutes that mattered on April 11, 2024. One account didn't fit the clock. The vehicle activity captured near the Florence address fell inside the working window. The person connected to that vehicle supplied a route and timeline that sounded routine, but device-to-network checks told a different story. A phone associated with that person showed a pause, no calls, no messages, a brief period dark, during the exact slice when a neighbor's camera logged headlights by Cristina Lopez's home. After the window closed, the same phone spun back up, with activity resuming miles away. That alone doesn't prove intent, it proves opportunity. When opportunity meets proximity and false detail, you move. Detectives pulled traffic frames from feeder roads leading in and out of Florence. A pair of low-resolution captures showed a matching vehicle silhouette inbound before the window and outbound after. The timestamps corrected for drift lined up with the neighbor motion logs. Fuel receipts collected by subpoena added a practical anchor, a transaction time that framed the drive. It wasn't dramatic in the room. It was decisive on paper. Interviews were revisited, not to confront, but to offer a chance for correction. Routes were re-asked, down to intersections. Small gaps widened. A detail that was once maybe 8:30 became closer to 9:30, but the record still didn't land in the clear. The team kept the tone neutral. This isn't where you argue, this is where you write. With the autopsy confirming homicide by sharp force injury and the final injury count fixed, prosecutors were consulted early. The question was whether the combination of access, the lack of forced entry, the tight timing, the vehicle presence, and the post-window movement was enough to justify an arrest. The answer was yes. On April 12, 2024, a warrant was executed. Javier Lopez, 49, was taken into custody in Phoenix in connection with Cristina's death. At intake, the booking is straightforward, identity confirmed, property logged, initial appearance scheduled. The charge posture, first-degree premeditated murder, reflects the state's theory, an intentional killing carried out with planning, supported by scene findings and the timeline. Premeditation in Arizona law isn't theatrical. It can be inferred from preparation, the nature and number of injuries and actions before and after. Here, the preparation isn't a manifesto. It's the use of a familiar door and a window chosen when resistance would be limited. There is no place for spectacle when a case shifts from investigation to prosecution. Evidence packets move, not speeches. Chain of custody logs accompany every item. A protective order for discovery is discussed, so sensitive material doesn't leak and contaminate witnesses. The state preserves the integrity of the child witness detail by sealing specifics that don't need to be public. The defense is entitled to disclosure. The public is not entitled to trauma. What matters to viewers is clarity. One scene, one night, one arrest that follows the facts. The name appears here for the first time in the story because this is where it belongs, after a timeline is built, after access is tested, after data forces a single direction. Cases like this don't turn on a single dramatic clip. They turn on the quiet pressure of matching minutes. There's a human reality to the moment of arrest too. Families don't celebrate, they breathe. An arrest doesn't bring closure. It brings structure, dates on a calendar, hearings, and a path to a sentence that will not change with rumor. That structure is an act of respect when the victim can't speak for herself. Once Javier Lopez was booked, the case turned from building a timeline to proving one. Discovery began. The state disclosed reports, device records, and lab documentation. Defense received copies under standard protections. This is the phase where a narrative becomes a file that can stand up in court. Prosecutors led with anchors, not theories. First, the medical examiner's final report. Homicide by sharp force injury, wound count 43, timing consistent with the late evening window established from dispatch and communications. No alternative medical cause. Second, the entry assessment. Doors and windows photographed, documented, and rechecked. No damage indicating a forced breach. Those points don't argue motive. They limit explanations. Digital evidence followed. Carrier call detail records and account logs showed ordinary activity for Cristina Tina Lopez tapering into evening, then stopping. No late outgoing calls, no request for help. On the other side of the ledger, the account linked to the defendant showed a period of inactivity during the critical minutes and resumed activity after the window, from a different area. The state noticed that pause and reactivate sequence and put a foundation witness on its list to explain how such records are made and stored. Jurors do not need jargon. They need to know the records are automatic and business kept. Video was treated the same way, not as cinema, as timestamps. Neighbor motion logs near the Florence address registered a vehicle consistent with the one associated to the defendant inside the window. Outbound activity appeared shortly after. Feeder road frames captured a matching shape inbound before and outbound after. Because clocks drift, technicians synchronize device time to dispatch time, then to the video system settings. The disclosure packet included that calibration, so argument later would focus on meaning, not math. Financial records added weight. A fuel receipt timestamped close to the window, framed traveled bank logs established that the card was used in a sequence that fit the road frames. Nothing about a receipt proves intent, but it narrows where a person could and could not have been. Pretrial practice is where evidence is tested without spectacle. The defense filed standard motions, challenged the admissibility of certain device records, questioned the reliability of a low-light video frame, probe whether any statement was taken without proper advisements. The state answered with chain of custody forms, custodian declarations for business records, and expert notices for limited testimony on data capture. Judges don't decide guilt here. They decide what the jury will be allowed to see. The domestic violence context was handled carefully. Prosecutors signaled they would frame the case as a domestic violence homicide consistent with a pattern of control and escalation, but they kept the focus on the night that mattered and the access that made it possible. This isn't a character trial. It's a proof trial built on where a car was when a phone slept and what a house did, stayed locked. By the end of discovery, the record could do the talking. A single scene in Florence, Arizona on April 11, 2024. A tight time window supported by medical findings and communications. A vehicle present and then gone. Account activity that went dark and then resumed. Receipts that framed movement. None of those items is dramatic standing alone. Together, they remove air from alternate explanations. The strongest trials feel inevitable because the paperwork is, there's a human piece worth one sentence. Pretrial hearings are where families learn how long the road will be. Dates get set. People show up, sit quietly, and wait for names and times to be read into microphones. Precision is a kind of respect. The record didn't blink. One address in Florence, Arizona, one late evening window on April 11, 2024, homicide by sharp force injury confirmed by the medical examiner, entry points intact, movement patterns and receipts that boxed in opportunity. With discovery complete and foundations uncontested, the courtroom shifted from proving a case to finishing one. On August 12, 2025, Javier Lopez stood in a Pinal County courtroom and pleaded guilty to first-degree premeditated murder. The judge walked through the rights he was giving up, took a factual basis that matched the file, and accepted the plea. No theatrics, just a defendant acknowledging what the evidence already showed. 4 weeks later, on September 15, 2025, the sentence made the outcome permanent. Natural life, no possibility of release. Prosecutors spoke briefly about a domestic violence murder carried out inside a home. The defense offered its remarks. The court recognized the family's loss and read the law as written. And the case ended where it had to end. This series began at a porch light and a kitchen floor. It closes with clarity, not flourish. Cristina Tina Lopez, 43, mother of 3, did nothing to invite what happened in her home. The investigation stayed narrow. Timestamps, devices, travel frames, receipts, and that discipline protected the truth from rumor. The story never split and the ending never changed. A human note kept short. If control, isolation, or monitoring are creeping into your life, tell someone early. Law enforcement, a hotline, a neighbor. Safety isn't a speech, it's a plan. In this case, logistics solved a murder. In another, logistics could prevent one. There's no victory in a sentence like this, only accountability. What remains is a single verified through line. Florence, April 11, 2024. Arrest in Phoenix, April 12, 2024. Guilty plea, August 12, 2025. Natural life, September 15, 2025. No alternate versions, no second ending. Just a community that cooperated, a family heard by the court, and a final record that won't budge. As I close this case, here's what I carry forward. Ordinary routines protect us when we notice breaks in them. Speak up early about control, isolation, or stalking. Safety is a plan, not a promise. Neighbors' records and patience made justice for Christina. Let's make them habits in our own towns. What would you do differently after this story? Did anything change your mind? Tell me where you're watching from, or why this didn't land for you. If this reached you, please subscribe so you won't miss the next case, and share it with someone who might need it. Stay kind, stay alert, and keep each other safe.